Great kickoff. Thanks, Ahmed. And welcome to you all. It's a delight to have you here. And to those of you who are here on the webinar, it's great to have you connected as well. And we very much look forward to your questions and comments as we go through. Just a quick sense. How many of you are are based in Sunnybrook in one way or another? And you're allowed to hold your hand up for multiple questions because I know people have multiple identities. So get your hands way up so I can actually see. Good. Okay. How many from elsewhere at U of T? Cool. Broader community. Wonderful. Good. Thank you all for being here. It's great to have you here. Ground rules. We have the two Brians who will lead most of the discussion. Brian Lewis from Medtech, Brian Courtney from here at Sunnybrook. I'll moderate. I'll fill in a few comments from here as we go. I've got some slides. I'll use some of them. Probably won't use a lot of them, but I'll make sure that Ahmed has access to the slides if anybody has any interest in them. As far as question and answer go, we'll do a formal question and answer at the end. But if you've got a question, don't wait. Just stick your hand up or yell, and let's make this as interactive. Brian, is that okay with you?
I absolutely agree with that.
And Brian, when we get to your part, that okay with you? Okay. So please don't sit there with a question burning at the back of your head. Get it out, because I'd much rather have this be interactive with getting at the things you care about rather than our guesses about what you might have cared about. That okay as a start? And let me also just do a sound check. Is this coming through okay to people at the back? Good. And those of you on the webinar, can we assume it's coming through to you? If it's not, shoot a question through and we'll do something about it. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Brian Lewis. And just as a quick introduction, Brian, as Ahmed said, is president and CEO of Medtech, the major industry association for the medtech sector, the medical device sector here in Canada. Brian was general manager of Genzyme Canada. He's worked with Hirschberry and Roussel, which is now part of Sanofi, if I remember correctly. If anybody's followed Sanofi, it's amazing how this company has gone through permutations over the years. You also worked with Serono. You've worked with AstraZeneca. You've got science degrees, business degrees from Guelph, from York. At some point, we're more than happy to pull you over to Rotman and get you to take another degree. But I'd like to turn it over to you and talk through the really from the perspective of the established sector, and not just the established firms, the Genzymes, the AstraZenecas, the Sanofis, but also how they engage with firms in the startup ecosystem. It's all yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Thank you so much. And I started by spilling water on myself, so it's always good to make a splash when you start something. If I could, hopefully you don't see all that. And Will, how do I run the?
Look for the arrow keys, and either up or left will take you forward, up or right will take you forward, down or back.
Oh, perfect. And I'd like to. So thank you for inviting me to be here today. I really, really appreciate it. And Medtech is the national trade association for medical technologies. We have over 150 members. And we deal with the different governments and stakeholders across the country. And I know people online can't see this, but I would like to introduce my colleague, Raj Malik, a handsome gentleman at the back there that's just put his hands up. And he is our Vice President of Government Affairs federally. So he gets to travel to the federal government and talk to Health Canada and the government about how we better enable the environment for medical technologies. He's also involved with stakeholder relations and goes across the country and speaks to the various purchasing organizations, right? So Raj will probably answer a few of my questions today because he knows the answers better than me because he works it all the time in terms of the federal level. But in terms of my agenda, I want to split it into two. Let's talk about, the current market, in terms of current market trends. Sorry, it got cut off there, but the market trends in terms of what's happening. And then some of the products and solutions that are going on in the environment. Mostly from a level of what's the conglomerate or groups or sectors that are building positively together. So let's talk about the environment, what's driving some of the trends. Look here, the source for this particular information is from 2012, but it's been going on for a while. I think many of you are aware of this. The provincial healthcare systems are financially stressed. We got a $240 billion spend across the country, and it's not enough. We're always looking for ways to try. The government's looking for ways. Hospitals are looking for ways to actually control the budget. So it's a bit of an issue in terms of whatever. What it's resulted in sometimes is there's not enough money to do everything we want to do. The other thing is there's a key feature of that particular budget. It's split into silos. So a surgery budget, some hospitals, a merge budget, transportation, hoteling, and management of that budget. It tends to get looked at within those silos. And it's that system approach does create issues in terms of when you're looking at something like purchasing innovative medical devices. So what this has resulted in, that siloed budgeting or whatever, if you take a look at medical technologies, it's less than 3% of that $240 billion. Considered practically nothing. But it's an easy area to actually control the budget as well, too. It's not like you have to go back and deal with staff and unions and cut in that area and have people that are that are doing the work in terms of kind of there. It's easy to focus on these areas. And they've been doing it for the last 10 years or so. But what it's resulted in really is continued pricing pressure, downward pricing pressure. So the procurement generally results on a focus on price rather than the value of the outcomes. And I'll go into that a little bit more as we talk, and then stop me if it's not clear in terms of what I'm talking about with that, because it's a really, really important concept, because there's a lot of things going on in the marketplace, both in Canada and globally, that are pushing, that are actually having an impact in this particular area. So this situation has led to unintended inhibitory consequences, let's say here, within the healthcare system, and have been commoditizing medical devices. Hospitals don't have the money, I'm talking about hospitals at this point in time, or even more broadly than that, to get new innovations that come in. So it's difficult to get them into the marketplace because the system is not supporting that innovation coming in. So it's resulted in that the adoption and diffusion of innovative medical technologies. Many Canadian-based innovators go outside of the country first. They go to the United States, or they go to Europe in order to launch the products, rather than coming into Canada. It's getting a bit trickier, but not completely, because sometimes there's some countries in the world that want grown-at-home experience. And there's a trend towards commoditization. Continued pressure to drop the price, because the shared service organizations do their jobs well. They've been told, focus, get us the lowest price, best for the, whatever given the volume, get us the best price for that product, and keep squeezing and going. But there's unintended consequences to that. Now, there's great opportunity, though. That's our old way of doing business in the country, but there's a chance to change it. So this is something that I've taken from the strategic clinical networks in Alberta. Providing high quality care with existing resources is a continued challenge for the systems. We get it, it is. One that must be overcome to ensure sustainability. We have to change this. And what is known is that innovative medical technologies can support the aim of healthcare system sustainability. But what you need to do is you need to look at that particular product or solution as it does the continued, or what do you want to call it, the complete care pathway. It's not just one-off surgery. It's actually bringing the patient into the surgery, in the pre-care, the post-care, follow up on that particular patient afterwards. It's all of the costs. So rather than thinking, you got to think about price. Price is a cost. You got to look at the total cost. Currently, our healthcare system is not well enabled to be able to capture those particular costs. So this is a really, a particularly important concept that in order to move forward, the system sustainability, because if you look at many new innovative medical technologies, they could save the system money, and they could extend the sustainability if we were able to get them and fit them into the system. But it is no easy task. The change management is quite extensive. And that's the other principle, is change management, that we have to get into, because there's a lot of work that's going on across the country and around the world. And everybody thinks change management's easy. I come from a marketing background. Everybody thinks marketing is easy. Raj, everybody thinks government relations is easy. Well, that's just easy. Just go on and talking to people. Well, it's not. There's significant changes that you have to make. There's ways of doing things. And the whole change management that has to go on, it has to be a systems approach to get us to where we're going. Any questions or comments at this point? I'm getting it easy, Will. So far, huh?
The screws will grind.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about value-based healthcare, and Porter, somebody you know about in terms of Will, in terms of teaching he does in terms of value-based healthcare. And value-based healthcare, the big idea that is driving change and reform to the healthcare, and particularly in supply chain management of new technologies, is value-based healthcare. And I know, sorry for reading, but it's a really important concept here. Value-based healthcare delivery, at the basic definition, is that within healthcare, we need to aim for better value for patients and increase quality per dollar spent. So cost doesn't come out of the equation, but it's a different focus on how achieving that cost. So here's the formula that Porter uses to describe this. Value equals outcomes, and we're talking about outcomes that matter to patients. So better outcomes for the patients in terms of from their perspective, and then that total cost of care of that particular individual. And it's important to note that it'll require the system. So I talked earlier about system change. It'll require the system to look at how we identify the costs, how we benchmark the outcomes. And again, it's not an easy concept. And I'll go through in a few minutes in terms of some people that are looking at how to do this and how we define and recognize value. Because those of you that are in cardiology, how you look at outcomes for a patient and how you determine the cost will be quite different than orthopedics. What we've got happening in medical technology a lot of the time is we use pharmaceutical-based HTA, QALYs. We look at a quality adjusted life year, and that's how CADIS generally measures outcomes for particular products that are there. But this new way of looking at it is realizing that more comes into that product, the solution, the training of the physician or other clinicians that are involved in it. It's looking at that whole picture. And you need to actually look at it differently depending on the standard of care and even the country that it's being treated in. So there's a lot to it in terms of this new look at getting to the outcomes in terms of measuring them, and also in terms of how cost is looked at and how budgets are reconciled within the healthcare institution. Okay. So let's talk about what's been going on in the world with innovative medical technologies and value. So here's the book, Redefining Healthcare by Porter. That's where the basic theory, and if any of you read this book or seen this book, Will, your hand would go up. Raj, you read the executive summary? Yes? Yeah. People from industry, there's the summaries, we've been to various courses on this, and it's really interesting in terms of what they're doing here. A lot of this Porter work was taken over to an organization where Porter is involved in. It's called ICHOM, the International Consortium of Health Outcomes Measurement. Who's heard of that? Has anybody heard of ICHOM? Will, again, has. But the rest of you, I think you really need to take a look. So what they do is ICHOM is looking at standardizing and come up with processes and standard sets for given disease states. So if you go onto their website, www.ichom.com, you will take a look at the standard sets that they're measuring in terms of the baseline for various disease states, and where's the starting point, and how do we measure that change in state. They also are bringing two other concepts into it. Integrated care, so not just looking at the physician treatment, but looking at the total care, including in some cases social workers. And then beyond that as well, they're also looking at bundled payment strategies, particularly in the United States. Now in Canada, there's several projects going on. Alberta has brought ICHOM in to their strategic clinical networks to actually help them determine their standard-based set. And also there's an association out there which deals with reconstructive surgery. That's an integrated care treatment area for patients that have had their faces disfigured by cancer, and the treatment. They're actually bringing in the ICHOM standard set. And then Europe, the EU, has developed what they call their value-based procurement measuring methodology, because the EU wants to use, let's look at products in terms of its value, not just the upfront price. Let's look beyond it. And I'll talk a little bit about what's going on in Canada. What's important is that not only in Canada, and I'll show you a little bit more of what's going on in Canada in a second, but around the world, they're looking at value-based healthcare. And so for us, when I go back up, for you that are actually developing products, you should know this area. And it won't always follow the Porter or the ICHOM model, but there's basic concepts that are absolutely, I think you really, really need to know, because you're going to be asked in the future, if we're ever going to move from the swooshing down of price to one of value, you're going to have to prove the value of your product. I know I went into one shared service organization. Shared service organizations, those that actually put the RFPs out for purchasing a product. And when we talk about focusing on value rather than focusing on price, it's like, yes, but find me a good measure for value. I remember one gentleman telling me at one point in time about a product. He said, look, I've got an issue. A given medical device hip manufacturer will come in and say, here's my hip. I want this much money. Here's the data that shows how my product is so much better than the competitors, and I've got Dr. Will backing me up, telling me it's great. So I've got that. Then the other competitor comes in. They say, here's my product for this price. Here's my data showing that it's better. It's not standardized, though. It's not comparing to a standardized norm. Here's the doctor supporting me. So the processes need to change. And you, as you get into the industry, you got to have an awareness of this and how you're going to do it. And I wanted to just let you know there's an easy place to look at all of this where you don't have to go back and actually necessarily read Porter's book, which isn't necessarily, where am I here? Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But we've got something at Medtech that's called the Value-Based Healthcare Quick Guide. It's about 10 pages, and it'll actually start you down this pathway. So go to www.medtech.org, and it's on the first homepage. You'll click on it, and you can print it off, and you can take a look at it, and it gives you the basic concepts without having to read a whole book. I know professors don't maybe like that sometimes.
I'm very much in favor of short.
And I had an expert in value-based healthcare actually develop it for us, and a fair amount of other organizations looking at it.
Great books only have one idea.
Yeah, I think you're right, right? It's, when you look at it, there's too much there, like some of the engineering texts that are out there. Managing system sustainability and economic development in Canada. If you take a look what's gone on in Canada, there's the Office of the Chief Health Innovation Strategist here in Ontario, Bill Charnetsky. Have any of you heard of him? Yeah, okay, good stuff. Some of you have heard of the Office of the Chief Health Innovation Strategist. The work that's done there is a group with the government that's actually trying to move to value-based healthcare. And the term is trying to move because the change management is absolutely huge. Bill's done this for 3 years now. I sit on a board with him. I sit on the Excite Management Board with him. And they're beginning to get some traction. They've got a huge value-based procurement on implantable cardiac defibrillators going on across the whole province. And they're really trying to learn, how do you implement value-based healthcare? Because I think that change management, you have to learn what the barriers are in terms of going forward. So a lot of particularly small companies that are associated with Medtech thought, I can go to Charnetsky, he's going to tell me what's good about my product, and I'm going to actually come into the market and I'm going to get adoption and fusion very, very quickly. Hasn't happened. In Alberta, you have the strategic clinical networks that have been in play for, what, Raj, 4 or 5 years now? That they are looking at strategic clinical networks. They're looking at, like ICHOM, various disease states. And they recently they started a project that was in delirium. And what it was is that looking at patients that come into the ICU with an infection, usually older, that they're progressed to delirium. What's a methodology if we test every single patient that comes in with a $40 in vitro diagnostics test, in terms of actually enhancing the care and letting less patients advance to the ICU? And they actually, that was 2.5 years ago, and they actually thought the project would advance very, very quickly, but it hasn't. It's ongoing now. I just had an update on it today. They've brought in several more people into the particular process to actually find the data that they need to prove that the outcomes for the patients really do matter and can save the system money. It's not that it's going to fail, but the project's taking a little longer. So a key message for me is all of this movement forward, it takes time. And the Office of the Chief Health Innovation Strategist is Quebec. They just hired an individual by the name of Mr. Paul Lachevêque, and he is the new Chief Health Innovation Strategist for Quebec. So Quebec also is trying to get in, how do we get medical technologies into the marketplace? How do you, that are developing new medical technologies, and if they're really of value, how do we get them in? So the doors are opening. That's my message, is the doors are opening, but it's an evolutionary journey. Is that a fair way to put it, Will? It's not revolutionary. You can't, I've had some Canadian-based organizations or Canadian headquartered organizations and even multinationals say, great, this is going to turn around, I'm going to get my market share, it's going to grow, and within 1.5 years, I'm going to have double the market share I had before. We're learning the processes as we go forward. They're learning what they need to do. Also in Ontario, let's go back up to OCHIS for a second. I've sat on the management board of Mars Excite. Now, other than Will, who's heard of Mars Excite? Okay, good stuff. There's more people that are there. I like that. And that more people have heard of Mars Excite. They've actually changed the product offering. And what it's for is that rather than a huge study that's, I don't know, 150, 250, or $1,000 or $1 million, they've got offerings for under $100,000. And they work really closely with the Ministry of Health in Ontario. And on the management board, we have people that are CEOs of hospitals that are actually looking at and putting input into those particular products to say, how do you position them to put them in the market? And then they work with Charnetsky's office as well. So you get an integrated solution to try and bring that particular product forward. It's worth knowing what they're doing. And so go to Mars's website, Mars Excite. There's the particular program that they've put in place. I was at the board meeting yesterday, and we've had 5 companies sign up so far, and 4 of them are skeptical multinationals. Anybody in here work for a skeptical, besides you, Raj, has anybody worked for a skeptical multinational before? This isn't going to happen in Canada. It's not going. They're signing up to look at this program. So I'm not trying to sell you on the program. What I'm saying is look at it. It's one of the things today is I wanted to pass on information because the Mars Excite is a way into Ontario to actually help you focus developing your product for Ontario. It's about taking your product and developing it in a way that's more efficient for you to get it to the market. Who else? We got Innovation Boulevard in British Columbia. There was a lot going on there, but when they switched the Liberal, I forget which government moved out. It was the Liberal government that went out, Raj? Yeah, it was. And then the NDP came in and the degree of interest dropped a little bit. Manitoba was saying, hey, wait a second, what about us? So they've now got, they're putting a program in place, and Medtech is having a huge event out there where they're looking at value-based healthcare with a lot of principles going forward. So you see across the country, there are, if you will, in the world that I come from in terms of sales, when you're trying to sell something, so I'm trying to sell Ahmed something, I make them aware, right? There's an awareness. There's a belief that my product could actually move to an offering. There's an intention to do so. And then there's action. He buys the product. It's the same thing with these particular programs. The governments have an intention to make it easier to get medical technologies to the market. The intention, but in terms of the action, like I said, there's a lot of work that's there. So stay on top of this. I think there's a lot of value that's here. Any questions or comments on that? Brian?
The pricing in Canada is pretty different than other slots, the regulatory stuff.
Right.
When I talk to other companies about their plans with new products that they're looking at producing, Canada's not high on their list in terms of wanting to get to that market.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
Are you seeing or are you hearing from the members of Medtech, the different companies that are members of Medtech, some people saying, you know, it's just not worth coming to Canada anymore for certain products? And is that creating any issues in any particular areas that you're aware of?
Yes.
Repeat the question for the audience on the webcast. That'd be great.
Yeah. So what Brian was asking is that the fact of the matter is that there's commoditization of the markets in Canada and the price continues to drop. The profile of Canada to bring new innovations into the market, if whether multinationals or Canadian headquartered organizations, their intention to launch products in Canada or not due to the commoditization and pricing pressure. And as Brian's in business, he absolutely knows the answer to that. And that, it's a good question to pose for all of you, though, is that there's absolutely been a drop in the number of innovations coming to Canada because the marketplace is not as attractive. And so a lot of multinationals, they've brought new products to European countries, to the US and other markets, and they have not brought them into Canada because of the regulatory burden of getting the product into the marketplace and getting the value back that they would get in other markets in the world. Now, fortunately for us, and that's why I showed the little fish jumping into the other thing, is that the federal government and the provincial governments are aware of this. And they realize that it's an issue. But, Brian can tell you too, the degree of change that's happened, what's meaningful change over the last while in terms of programs have been put into place, but they haven't borne fruit yet. Things haven't gone forward. in terms of making a significant change. And that's something I always talk to Bill Chernetsky about, the Chief Innovation Strategist. It's like, great, Bill, we're doing all this great stuff. When? When are we going to have something that I'm going to be able to go back to Brian as the CEO and say, here's an example of where it happened, right? Not a small pilot, but it's happened at a significant enough level. So, and I'll actually get to the Health Canada thing in a minute if I could. So, you know, it's an excellent point, and it's what I'm trying to tell you. It's in progression, and let's not look at the way it is now or 5 years ago. Let's keep our eye on the way it's going and try to facilitate the move forward. Here's our other key trends we're seeing in the marketplace. Funding model reform will drive evolution to integrated care pathway models. We believe that's happening in terms of those funding reform models that are out there. If you look at the government of Ontario, there's a part of the Ministry of Health that's focused on funding reform. It's going on around the world, some of the stuff that ICHOM is talking about. So we believe this going forward, that this will drive things forward. Increasing role of data and analytics is that we look now that real world evidence, supply chain data, so supply chain data, barcodes associated with supply chain, the patient in the ERP system, so if you will, the clinical practice systems, the clinical information systems of treating patients, the supply chain data, and the hospitals or provinces enterprise resource system need to be interconnected together. And this is going on to be able to supply the type of data so that when we're looking at products and how they perform, we can get data a lot sooner in terms of real world evidence of that performance. So we believe that's going to happen. Patients increasingly connected to knowledge and more demanding consumers they were before. Particularly the younger you are, the more you're like that as well. And the move to technology will continue to enable virtual and home care. Those of you that are in the software world, this is particularly moving us forward to continue to enable virtual and home care delivery. And we have at Medtech a whole committee that deals with what we call hospital to community, because we see that move happening, and the rise of personalized and integrated care. Any questions, comments? No? And have put anybody to sleep yet? Not yet? Raj? No? No, okay. So let's talk about products and solutions in Canada. If you take a look at, one of the things Raj talks to the federal government about all the time is that this industry is worth investing in. The medical technology industry needs better support. It doesn't necessarily need more funding up front for the initial stages of company development. But if they really want to help companies grow to a large size to be a recognized body, in terms of that commercialization of a company, we need more support, more dollars into that marketplace, for sure. But we also need to have them help enable the environment. And what we're talking about is the move in the country and what Brian was talking about in terms of regulatory approval, and then also about federal government input into the move to value-based healthcare. And what we find in Canada right now, there's 4 markets where we have a strong base, because the federal government tends to spread wide and thin. So in vitro diagnostics and microfluidics, there's over 130 organizations that are there, and microfluidics is part of that 130, not all of it. So we actually have a strong base of commercialized companies in vitro diagnostics, image-guided therapy and medical robotics, artificial intelligence, and connected health. They're areas where strength is also already being developed in Canada, and we are pointing that out to the federal government first, and then we're bringing it to the provinces afterwards as well. Because if you come in Ontario, it's true, you go out to Alberta and you ask the areas they're working in, 3 of the 4 solutions at least are in each province. Regulatory approval. International Medical Device Regulatory Forum. What we're trying to do is get harmonized with the rest of the world. So the Trudeau government, if whether you like the Trudeau government or not, I'm not up here holding up the card for any individual political party. They are focused on innovation. And what they want Canada to do is they want to actually be able to fix the environment in Canada in terms of the regulatory burden in order to enhance innovation. And it's a big project. And so one of the things is we sit with the International Medical Regulatory Device Forum in terms of harmonization of certain practices. And secondarily, in Health Canada themselves have got 3 foci that they're focusing in on is 1, the time to approval. Health Canada is one of the takes longer than any place else in the world. If I go in, I've got my medical device and I put my initial file in, over 50% of those will come back with a screening deficiency. And once it comes back to you with a screening deficiency, guess what? It's a number of months before you get it back in again. Then you get it in, and the screening deficiency, it passes, it gets in. 50% plus of the products have an incomplete information. Additional information request comes back in. In terms of what are called ATIs, the clinical trial activity, particularly in cardiology, it's been horrible. You know, they've gone into Health Canada and it's been delayed, it's taken a lot longer. Now, what Health Canada has done, and I've met with Simon Kennedy, has come and talked to our whole association, and what we've seen after that as well, there's now a focus, they've put more resources into the Medical Devices Bureau. So they're building it, they're figuring out where's their capacity. They developed a sector within medical device review now for software. So there's a sub-department that their whole job is looking at that. They've been looking at Medtech to say, how do we get our efficiencies, continuous quality improvement? How do we help you, the developer of a product, manufacturer, actually develop your product, and how do we change what we're doing in order to increase the more beneficial approval times? And they've got that process set up, and they're working on it right now. They continue to collaborate with us and our links with other trade associations. So it's in process. The other thing that's set up, and soon there will be an announcement, if there hasn't already been one, in terms of pre-market determination meetings. You've got an innovative product coming along, they want to sit with you, particularly if you're a Canadian headquartered organization. They want to sit with you, even though they'll sit with the multinationals, and actually tell you what type of information they need, and to look at themselves and say, what kind of people skill set do they need to analyze those products? Because what you don't realize is a lot of the innovation that's coming along, it's totally new to them, and they have to make sure they have the capability internally in order to be able to drive that. So that's some of the changes that have gone out on the marketplace. You know, the move to value-based healthcare, as Health Canada regulatory, and other elements of regulations. So it's moving. Has it changed yet? Not appreciably, but it continues to change, and that's why there's a trade association. We continue to get into the conversations. So with that, Will,
That's brilliant.
thank you.
Great. Thank you, sir. Brian, thank you so much. And I'm going to pick up on a couple of the ideas that Brian talked about. We're about 15 minutes. We'll make 6 o'clock a reasonably hard stop, because I would like us to have time to sit down, chat, and get something to eat. I have a bunch of slides. I'm going to use a few of them. I'll probably use about 4 of them. I'll make sure that Ahmed has access to the rest of them, and if you want access to them, you can get them. And let me start with Brian's point about regulatory burden. In another life, I have an index I keep about market support and how easy it is to do business in different countries around the world. And I have an index that has roughly 190 countries in it. And Canada typically finishes around 10 or 12. And if you're Canadian, 10 or 12 sounds pretty good. But if you're real, 10 or 12 is awful. Because we're not competing just with the US and the UK and Germany anymore. We're competing with China, and we're competing with Korea, and we're competing with Singapore, and we're competing with Brazil, and we're competing with companies in countries around the world. And if we're going to be viable, we need to be a lot better. You know, we need to be New Zealand and Denmark are in the top 5. And New Zealand and Denmark can be in the top 5. There's no reason why we shouldn't be in the top 5. And one of the big reasons we're not in the top 5 is our regulatory burden. We're pretty good on a lot of things. One of the things we're really slow on is the regulatory activity. So that's just, I'll get off that soapbox. Where I want to take us, first slide I want to talk about is this. How many, I can't walk away, I'm not allowed to walk away from this mic. How many of us in this room get excited about the products and the services and the cool things we're working on? In fact, you can put up 2 hands. I can probably put up a foot as well. How many of you get excited about trying to figure out where on earth it fits in the market? I want to see some hands come up. Because where's the money? Product or the market? Where's the growth? The product or the market? Where's the success? And by success, I partly mean business success. But frankly, I just as much mean clinical success and impact on people's lives. Because how many of us are in this room, in part, because we want to have an impact on people's lives? Absolutely. You know, this one you get to put both feet on. And if you think about the goals that we have for the healthcare system, every healthcare system, whether it's a Canadian healthcare system or any healthcare system, it's to have a really strong tripod of three things, right? Where on the one hand, we have products that have great quality, great innovation. On the second hand, we have as broad-based access as we possibly can so that as many people can access the services and the products. And the third is that it be cost-effective. And to do that well, we need to understand not just the products, but first and foremost, we need to understand the market in which it fits. And if you think about the market for medtech, this is the demand side. And even though in many cases the exciting stuff, or the stuff that keeps us up at 4 o'clock in the morning, is the products and the services and the cool stuff we're working on in the lab and the cool stuff we're working on our garages or wherever it is we're working on it. The thing that should be keeping us up at 4 o'clock in the morning is try to figure out what on earth does this market landscape look like? And this is a Rubik's Cube, as we all know. And a Rubik's Cube is constantly moving, and you're trying to get everything lined up. And the demand side for medtech is partly about channels. It's hospitals, it's clinics, it's pharmacies, it's science, it's online, mail sometimes even still. Let me pick up on hospitals for a moment. Brian, you started talking about hospital sales. And certainly for most of the medtech companies in Canada, the primary channel for sales has been what? Hospitals. It's been buildings like this. I edit a journal called Health Management Policy and Innovation, HMPI. We just published an article by a friend of mine at Johns Hopkins, where he looked out at about 5 trends in the environment and said, if we look out 20 years, take these trends seriously, there are things around technology, there are things around online ability, and consumer trends. What proportion of the services that we now provide in hospitals will be provided somewhere, will still be in hospitals 20 years out? And his aggressive, but realistic, but aggressive prediction is 10%. Another way of saying that is 90% of the stuff that we do in buildings like this will be done in primary care facilities, they'll be done in pharmacies, they'll be done in the home, they'll be done in places that are different than this. What does that mean for our understanding of markets if we're in medtech? Think about the 4 things that Brian put up there as things that we're working on now. Most of those are actually really hugely have opportunities outside the hospital base. So that alone, if any of us, how many of us in this room are thinking possibly working in an established medtech company? And you can keep both hands up if you want. How many of you think you're working in a startup, whether your own or somebody else's? So whether you're an Abbott, GE, Medtronic, one of the established companies, Stryker, or whether you're Brian and others in a startup, understanding the nature of this, what's the change in the demand side, is absolutely central to your careers and your success. If you don't get it, you fail. Brian, am I pushing that too hard?
No, you're not. No.
So channels, second, decision makers. And this is a market in which consumers to some extent and their families make decisions, healthcare professionals make decisions, scientists make decisions, physicians, clinicians make decisions. Understand, for any product, any service, the product itself is irrelevant unless you understand not only the channels, but who's going to make the decisions and which multiple set of stakeholders are going to make the decisions. And that's going to change for every single product and every single service. So if you don't take the product and service you're excited about and think hard about who's going to make the decision about using it, it's a complete and total waste of time to be working on it. Brian, Courtney, am I pushing that too hard? Geography. There's sales in traditional developed markets, there's sales in emerging markets. China's grown like stink. India is growing, Korea has grown, Brazil has grown, Turkey has grown, Russia has grown. And as Brian said, for a company operating in Canada, especially a startup company in Canada, in many cases we have to think about being born global. Even under the best conditions, we're not big enough. It's a wonderful place, but we're not big enough. And so even if we start here, we've got to get global fast. And because of the size of the market, because of the cost pressures, because of the regulatory issues, in some cases we just have to start out thinking, let's figure out how to get born global. and that may mean working with friends in Indianapolis to give us an entry. It may mean working with a hospital system in Germany to figure out how to get going. It may, in some cases, mean working with a hospital system in Beijing or Shanghai to figure out how to get going, or Hong Kong or Delhi. But if we don't start thinking about being beyond Canadian borders really fast, in many cases, we're not going to be able to get going at all. And then there's all the influencers. Right? So it's not just the channels, it's not just the decision makers, it's not just the geography. There's all these folks who shape the decisions. The regulators, the payers, the academic opinion leaders, the professional associations, patient groups, activists, employers, the media, friends, supply chain, and I'm sure I'm leaving a bunch off. Sound complicated? Anybody nod yes? Sound important? Nod twice yes? Because again, if you can't figure this stuff out, if you don't spend the time figuring this stuff out, don't spend the time on the supply side. Now, the supply side is exciting, right? I mean, one of the wonderful things about medtech is there's so many different spaces, right? There's electric medical stuff, there's surgical equipment, there's medical equipment, dental, optical, diagnostics, healthcare informatics. Some folks would put it in there, including me. Scientific and technical instruments. There's a whole bunch of related services. There's a massive number of firms. It's not like pharma where you got kind of 25 big firms than everybody else. This is a world where there's some big leaders like the GEs and the Medtronics and Johnson & Johnson devices. But it's reasonably general slope in the sense there's an amazing number of opportunities in this country. You've got what, 85 members at Medtech, something like that.
They're full members.
Yeah. So in this country alone, 85 full members, and go across the world. There's a stunning number of firms, established firms, and an even stunninger number of startups in every country that I work in that are working in this space. It's a complicated value chain. How are we doing for time? I'm going to flip. So there's a bunch of slides here. I'm just going to flip to the end on them, just because I really want to make sure that we get medical. Let me do this one. Employment trends. Anybody interested in employment? Bottom line is it's gone up. It's kind of flat, but it's flat in a high plateau. And it looks flat, but flat mean there's flat stable and there's flat people leaving and people entering. In this industry, what would you expect? People staying forever and nobody new coming in? Or a lot of people leaving and a lot of people coming in? And go back to the trend I talked about earlier about taking sales out of hospitals and moving them into other settings where you need people with very different skills. Would you expect this to be a flat, dynamic market? In fact, it is. So even though it looks flat, there's lots of cool opportunities. And it's flat on a high base. Medical device sales, they keep going up. It's stabilized to some extent, but especially if you look globally, if you look at India, if you look at China, if you look at Korea, even Brazil with its challenges, even Russia with its challenges. Russia should be pretty hard right now. In fact, Russia should be really hard right now. But there's enough outside the traditional developed markets. Europe is getting back on its feet. There's cool opportunities. Employment trends. Canada, we're what, 7 billion, does that sound right? And we're pretty flat. This is, and come back to Brian's point around, this is not an easy market. Both Brians have made this point. It's partly because it's small, it's partly because it's flat, it's partly because of the cost containment, it's partly because of the regulatory pressures. There are opportunities here, I'm not sneezing at them, they're real. And there's a reason why there are 85 companies that are part of Medtech, because there are opportunities in this country. But again, I don't think it's enough, except in maybe some very, very focused slices, to really drive long-term success for any company. Market segments, overall growth is 1 to 3% a year. Sound about right? Probably closer to 1 than 3. Is that fair? With some areas, dental at least historically has, and orthopedics have been growing a bit faster than other areas. These are numbers from Industry Canada. They may be a little out of date. Yeah. Good market, but not big enough for virus. And so I think if there's one thing I'm going to push us on now, is as wonderful as this place is, and as sophisticated and powerful as this place is, everybody in this room has got to be thinking beyond Canadian borders. And Buffalo is not global. Buffalo's a nice place, but it ain't global. Lots of deals going on, lots of cool stuff going on, lots of regulatory issues. Here, let me spend a moment here. So historically, when we've told value stories, when we've gone to buyers, we've gone to payers, we've gone to key opinion leaders, we've gone to folks and said, use my product, buy my product, pay money for my product, for my service. We've talked about the right-hand side of this equation. We've talked about the health value, right? This is a really important product because it is better than some other product in the market, because it does a better job at your hip, at giving you mobility in your hip. Or if it's a stent, it lasts longer than somebody else's. Or it's cleaner than somebody else's, right? And the health value story is still really important. You know, we've got to be able to tell a value story that makes a compelling, evidence-based health side for why you should take this product seriously, this service seriously. But the health part of it isn't enough. There's got to be just as compelling an economic value story, a financial value story. Why is this going to save you money? Now, you can make it the saving money meaning we'll price it cheaper. We won't charge you as much. How long does that strategy last? Short time or long time? Make it easy. Brian, can you make a career out of cutting price? So the economic value story has got to be not just we're cheaper. In fact, ideally not even at all we're cheaper, but we have a much stronger life cycle systemic advantage in cost and finances. And I pick up on the points that Brian was talking about: value-based pricing, value-based marketing, value-based value in general. I'm thrilled at the advances that we're making, in BC, in Alberta, in Manitoba, in Quebec, in Maritimes here, in thinking about value. And a lot of that's being driven by provincial payers, by shared service organizations which are owned by the hospitals, by other agencies outside of us. But it's not enough just to wait for Plexus to get it as a shared service organization. It's not just enough to wait for the Ministry of Health in Alberta to get it. It's not just enough to wait for Christine Elliott in Ontario to get it in the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. We have opportunities to be proactive in helping shape the understanding of this as well. And that's partly a job for, if you're working in an established firm, you're working for Abbott, you're working for Stryker, to think through, how does this product and service cut across the silos that Brian talked about? How does it affect cost and value in surgery? How does it affect cost and value in post-surgical care? How does it affect cost and value in prep? How does it affect cost and value once you go outside surgery and into primary care? So you can make a compelling case for not just it's going to affect us in surgery, but it's going to affect the system. And not just the system at one point in time or over this next 3 months, but develop the tools to be able to make a case for how this is going to affect costs over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years of someone's life. And if I look at some of the amazing technologies that are coming out of the companies now, both companies like Brian Courtney's, and as well as the established firms, the cool thing about them is they have a really big potential impact on both health outcomes and financial outcomes for the next 20, 30, 40 years of someone's life. And we need to get better, and we can wait for the Ministry of Health to recognize that. And if we wait for the Ministry of Health to recognize that, I'll be dead, and most of you will be very old, and your children will still be waiting. We'd have it's for just both in terms of our responsibility in having a clinical impact, and in our goals for being strategically effective and having a business impact. We need to develop the skills to be able to identify, measure, articulate both systemic benefits at one point in time and the life cycle benefits over time. Now, that sound easy? Sound like fun? Sound like a puzzle? It's actually a really cool puzzle. And it starts simple. And the way to start simple is to say, what two budgets now, what things now are showing up in two budgets where I can make a case that there's a credible case to bring those two budgets together and make a joint decision. It really is that simple. And if you go back to the first slide I showed, you understand the system well enough to know where the budgets are. And there's all this mess out there. And to be identify two, surgery and post-op. And have a champion in the surgical group, have a champion in the post-op group, who will sit down together and make a joint decision where they historically have made individual decisions that make sense for them, and frankly also make sense for you. And sometimes you're going to win and sometimes you're going to lose. But if you don't do it, your children will still be waiting. My grandchildren will still be waiting. And people will be dying literally, and I'm not exaggerating, because of not getting access to the services that are sitting out there. So if you come back to the hands I saw about having an impact in the clinic, having an impact on people's lives, this business stuff about being able to make a financial case, an economic case, as well as being able to make a health case, is fundamentally central to delivering on that mission. I'll leave those out. Overall, there's way more innovations out there, right? And so we come back to where does strategic advantage come from? From doing a bunch of stuff that other people are doing, or from doing something that other people are not doing something valuable that other people are not doing. There's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people working around the world on science. I can walk into labs in Haifa, I can walk into labs in Tel Aviv, I can walk into labs in Singapore, I can walk into labs in Korea, I can walk into labs in Shanghai, I can walk into labs in Toronto, in Vancouver, pick your favorite city around the world. There's somebody working on really cool science with amazing health impact value. The winners are not the ones that just have the health value. They're the ones who really understand the stakeholders in the market and why it's going to be worthwhile for them to make a cost-effective choice. They will also contribute to quality and innovation. They will also contribute to access. So we get these really strong tripods. And that's the thinking we have to have in this room. No matter how excited you are about the product and service you're working on, understanding the demand side and what makes someone really deeply want to engage with you is what's going to drive success. Whether you're working for an Abbott or whether you're working for an Abbott, picking up on Brian Courtney's company. Final slide. Some summary points. I think maybe, Brian, you can see whether this makes sense to you. And this is a profitable industry. It's not hugely profitable, but it's comfortable. It's easy to lose money, especially as a small firm, even sometimes as a big firm. It's not as profitable as pharma or bio. It's more profitable than auto. It's it's in the order of normal profitability across the S&P 500 or the Dow. It's hugely varied, which is one of the things that makes it fun. It's hugely global, which is the second thing that makes it fun. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money in what I call feeding the beast, getting new products into service, sometimes building it, sometimes borrowing it through alliances, sometimes buying through acquisitions. It's even more money in taking the beast to market. The regulatory expenses, marketing expenses are bigger than R&D expenses. We spend a lot of money on R&D, and we spend a lot more money on the marketing and the regulatory side. If you like deals, alliances, acquisitions, all that stuff, there's lots of them. You can make a career out of figuring out how to make those things work. If you like the academic interface with business, it's there. It's powerful. It's there to some extent with academic big firm. It's there hugely with academic small firm. It's hugely with small firm. There's lots of opportunities in that space. It's a really complex value chain. It's one of the most complex puzzles I know of, and as a result, is huge fun. If you like lying awake at 4 o'clock in the morning thinking about just all the different parts of the system, this is a very cool one to do that with. And it's increasingly emphasizing value. I mean, the point that Brian is making about value base is dead on from everything I hear in this country, everything I hear in the US, everything I hear, frankly, out in Europe or globally. And the point you made, Brian, about, well, how do we measure it? How do we recognize it? Is absolutely at the center of the conversation at this point. Nobody out there is going to say, we don't want value. But they are going to say, convince me that you're delivering value that I should pay for. And that's, again, why I think there's an opportunity for us to be proactive in this and really thinking through both the systemic value at a point in time, the life cycle value over time, and do it in as concrete and honest a way as we possibly can for this room. And one story, and then I'll stop. I'm familiar with one company that has emphasized a value-based strategy and has gone to some of its product managers and said, guess what? We're not going to sell this product line anymore because we can't make a credible case for why it delivers value. Easy story inside a company or tough story inside a company? That's really tough. I mean, it says, basically, we're not going to sell your product anymore, and by the way, you don't have a job anymore. But they believe that in order to be credible with their buyer, with the people who are buying from them, they've got to be able to make a case for why this product and services that they're selling, some of them old, some of them new, we did deliver value. And to be able to say we looked at it with a value-based eye, and some of these things that we used to sell you, we're not going to do it anymore because we just don't think they deliver the value that we can stand up for. So again, if we can get our heads around that the concept of value and the concept of figuring out how to measure it and make a strong case for why it makes sense, there's really cool careers in this space. So 604, Ahmed, where did you go? There you are. Anything you want to say as we take a break for?
Not really. I just wanted to check if there are any of the remote audience.
Perfect. Good question. Good point. Yeah. How do we get to that? Why don't you do that? And while Ahmed's doing that, questions from this room?
So no questions.
Yeah. Right.
So you spent a part of your career in, I believe, the research triangle area.
RTP. Yeah.
And if you're to compare what the culture is like, what the activity is like, what the advantages and strengths of that area relative to Toronto and vice versa are, what are kind of the top sort of three comparisons?
So two. RTP's faster or bigger. There's more complex opportunity here, and not just bigger in scale, but bigger in variety. Duke's got, the universities in the Research Triangle area, Duke, NC State, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, have a lot going on. But if you look at what's happening at U of T, you look at what's happening at Kitchener-Waterloo, or you look at what's happening in Hamilton, there's actually a more diverse base here. So we're bigger with more, actually in more opportunity, but we're slower. We're slower to get things going, and frankly, we're slower to shut things down, especially in the academic enterprise. How many of us in the academic enterprise like shutting things down? And how many of us in our heart of hearts know that we should be? Because it was a hypothesis and we tested it and it failed. And you shut it, when you reject hypotheses, you stop and work on another hypothesis. And I think that's partly a cultural thing in the US. It's partly driven by the funding environment, which is fairly, you can call it short term, but it certainly pushes people to try things out and then shut it down. RTP is not as dynamic as the two big bases in the US, Silicon Valley on the one hand, on the Bay Area, Boston on the other. But it's certainly one of the centers along with, say, La Jolla near San Diego, or Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, or Minnesota, which has a lot going on. And the speed of decision making is really one of the things that really strikes me there. I mean, you know the area. You can compare the area. What else would you put in the mix?
I think there will be more risk capital, but there might not be as much support to kind of get from time to time, depending on the scope.
Yeah, and let's pick up on the notion of why there's more risk capital later, because I want to spend a little bit of time on that, but I think I'd like to do that in the context of your discussion, because there's a chicken and egg here, right? Do you get risk? You need risk capital to drive success, but you need success to drive to attract risk capital, and I want to think a little bit about what we can do to create the potential for success that will get risk capital even more excited than it has been historically about the GTA.
I think the other big difference in my mind is that the healthcare centers in the U.S. compete more aggressively with each other because their patient base or customer base, and I want to look at it, they have options, and therefore options compete to look like they're more advanced or to be more advanced.
Yeah, so let me just, for this one, it's actually, let me just go back to the market sizes. And I skimmed over this, but let me just spend a moment on it. Where is it? Here we are. There we go. There's the US market. Roughly $150 billion. Not huge, but when you figure that pharma is roughly 450 billion, but it's rough, say a third of the pharma market. Now, Canada, US, the usual rule of thumb is take the US and divide by 10, right? So if you took 150 billion and divided by 10, what did you get? It's easy. It's arithmetic, 15. And yet we're about 7. So there's just more money. Whether some of it's because of the hospitals competing with each other, some is because of just some great less conservatism in the public payment system, some of it's less conservatism in the private payment system. But there's just more money, per capita going into devices. It's a bigger market. Ahmed, did I miss? Were there questions on the?
No questions.
Okay. So good. Let's take a break. Get something to eat. Brian, I want to say once again, thank you so much,
My pleasure. Thank you.
and thank you all for being here.